We will focus this first part in the morning about how we get to a benefit-risk opinion for the marketing authorization. So it will be a succession of presentation with questions after each presentation. So feel free to ask a lot of questions and come back on the topics. The order doesn't matter so much. And I will leave the floor to maybe you're the first one to moderate and to introduce our speakers, because we are very pleased to have a valuable speakers who can talk from experience. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Agnes, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jordi Linares. I'm the head of scientific and regulatory management here at the agency. It's a very difficult name for a unit that supports basically marketing authorizations and data generation post-marketing. I have the pleasure to chair the first, I would say, two slots of this session. Then we'll have also Lucia coming to chair the second part. And I'm really glad to have two very good speakers from the network. First, we'll have Dr. Christina Dander. She's a member of the CHMP, very experienced assessor and member of the CHMP on benefit risk, and that will be the first part that we'll have. Benefit risk is really, I would say, a pillar of what we do when we think about putting a product on the market. That's really the core rationale behind the assessment. And then after we'll have Andrea Taft. She's from the agency. She's also very experienced, and again, glad to bring you first-hand experience on how do we deal with the regulatory science at the agency, also guidelines, which is really also another very important set of principles we have in order to guide development from the pharmaceutical companies and us having really objective rules in terms of assessment. Without more introduction, because I think what is important is to go to the presentation and then to the questions after each one, I give the floor to Christina Dander. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordi, for the nice introduction. So as Jordi said, I've been in the committee, the CHMP, for maybe 8 years, and I've been working in the regulatory world for maybe 12 years. And before that, I was a medical doctor and specialist in internal medicine and endocrinology for many years. So I'm going to talk to you today about benefit risk assessment. Let's see if I can switch slides from here. It should be able normally, but not. Oh no, was it me or you? Me. It was you. Okay. Yeah, let's try again. No, it's not working.
No? Okay, I got maybe the...
You don't have a sapphire?
Yeah, no, it was off.
Oh, it was off. Okay, very good. Then we can start. So I'm going to talk to you about assessment of benefit-risk balance of new products, and to do that, to structure the talk, I've formulated 3 questions, which I will talk to you about: why we do this and why it's important, how do we do it, and how do we communicate this, our conclusions, and who are the recipients of those conclusions. So I think you've heard about the CHMP. We are responsible for this evaluation. I think you heard about it before, but we are one member from each EU member state, one alternate, and also members from Iceland, Norway. And of course, it's the assessors at home who are performing the assessment of the data. But I think we can say that we at CHMP are responsible for the final conclusions, which we then send to the EU Commission. Let's go to the first question, why we do this and why it's important. Well, indeed, this is the final reflection of our assessment of the data that the companies have submitted to us. And it's up to us to identify the condition, the population, and sometimes also the conditions for use for which it is established that benefits outweigh the risks. And of course, for any product, the benefits must always be stronger than the risks. How do we do it? Well, this is indeed a continuous process which we perform during the whole assessment procedure. At day 80, which is the first time point when we perform this assessment, it's separate between the rapporteur and the co-rapporteur. But at the other time points during the assessment, it is the CHMP, as I said, that comes up with this conclusion. And I must say that this position on the benefit-risk balance, whether it's positive or negative, that's the way we express ourselves, differ throughout this assessment procedure. Often we may think that we are negative at day 80. We say that the benefit-risk balance is negative for a product, but then we get more information from the company, and eventually at the end of the procedure we may say that it is positive. As I said, assessors do a lot of this work, and we have template and guidance to help them, but I must say it's not really an easy task at all. And I think there are several challenges. These are just some of them. For instance, which results, which endpoints are most important. We have scientific guidelines to specify this, and you will hear more about this in the upcoming talks here. But what endpoint should we look at? Should we focus on objective or subjective endpoints, for instance? These are, of course, important for patients, both of them, but we really want to detect a drug effect, and maybe the objective endpoints are most sensitive to detect such an effect. Do we have surrogate endpoints we can look at? And what do I mean with that? I mean intermediate endpoints like, for instance, blood pressure. If we have an effect on blood pressure, we know that we also have an effect on, for instance, stroke. The next challenge is to decide the value of a certain benefit or risk, and I will come back to that. And then, of course, how to weigh these benefits against the risks. How do you do that? Do you do it in a kind of qualitative way, you use your knowledge, or should you use a more quantitative analysis? And with that, I mean a more mathematical model. Another challenge is whether we should look at absolute or relative benefit risk assessments. And with that, I mean absolute is that you look just at the product you have in front of you and weigh the benefits against the risks. Or should we also weigh this or compare the benefit risk assessment of the product to other products which we have approved previously for the same condition? So these are the things we need to consider when we perform this benefit risk assessment. Before we start, we also need to consider the therapeutic context, and we always do that. We look at the disease, we look at the indication proposed by the applicant, we look at the aims of therapy. As I said, what are the most relevant efficacy endpoints and safety endpoints when we look at this product and this condition. We also have to be aware of what is already approved out there, is there an unmet need, and so on, and we look at and identify which are the main clinical studies. Then we try to structure our assessment like this, and this is a structure we have in our assessment reports. We try to look at benefits first, then uncertainties and limitations with benefits, risks in the same way, uncertainties with the risks, and finally we try to weigh the benefits against the risks. If we start looking at the benefits, we try to first describe them in a quantitative way, describe the key endpoints, the key outcomes. What was the size of the effect? What was the confidence intervals? What is the precision of the effect? Then we also look into important subgroups and consider whether the results are similar in women and men, for instance, in different age groups, different ethnicities, and so on. In this section of our report, we try to avoid interpretation and value judgments. We try to just present the data so that you, reader, can really understand what data we have been presented, which have been presented to us, and maybe you can also draw your own conclusions based on this. But when you look at benefits of a product, there are also a lot of uncertainties, and these are just some of them, and we need to be aware of them. The sample size, for instance, is it large enough to be able to show an effect? Is there statistical significance? How broad are the confidence intervals? Other methodological aspects, GCP compliance issues, choice of comparator, etc. I won't read all of this. I just want to highlight that there are always uncertainties and we need to be aware of them. And almost always we put questions to the companies and ask them to clarify some of these issues for us. Risks, very much the same. We try to describe them. How common are they? How severe are they? Are they reversible or not? Because this is, of course, very important when we later on try to value these risks. Also here, look into subgroups. And they're very much the same. Uncertainties when it comes to risks. how large was the study? Did we even have a chance to detect rare adverse events? Because if it's a very small study, of course, you cannot see rare adverse events. And all this we have to describe and take into account. And then we start assessing and putting value to these findings. We describe first, and then we try to evaluate them. And this is the difficult part, I think, because then we must try to understand what is the clinical relevance of these benefits. And of course, that may differ between different conditions. It may differ also within the condition between patients with different severity of the disease, but we try then to capture all the knowledge that there is, our own knowledge, of course, what we have done for previous drugs, expert meetings, patients' consultations, and so on. And we do the same for the risks. We often have expert meetings, and at the expert meetings, we always have patients there and try to get as much information as possible to understand what these benefits and risks mean for the patients. Here, we also try to find out how should we handle the uncertainties. Maybe we decide on warnings, restricted indications, and so on. And then we try to balance these benefits and risks. Today, as I said before, we do this based on knowledge from ourselves and from outside world. There are initiatives looking into maybe if you can do this in a different way, use more quantitative analysis. With that, I mean mathematical models, put a certain value to a benefit, certain value to a risk, and then try to come up with a number that sort of indicates how strong the benefit-risk balance is. We are not there yet. It is something that is looked into of several stakeholders. Let's see where we end up in eventually. But today we are not doing this. We're more doing a qualitative analysis based on knowledge. Then it's important for us to describe the condition and the population for which we think the benefit risk is positive. And sometimes, we end up with a population that may be broader than the one that was studied because we think that the effect and the risk can also be extrapolated to other populations where we have limited data. And sometimes we end up in more restricted restricted population because we think the benefit risk is not possible in the whole study population. And therefore, if we do so, we really have to explain this in the assessment report, and we try to do so that the outside world can understand how we came to a certain decision. Another very difficult question, I think, is whether we should do relative assessments of benefit risk. And with that, I mean, should we compare the benefit risk to other products out there or not? Sometimes we have studies where the new product is compared to already available products, and then, of course, we can compare them. But there is not really a requirement that a new product must be more efficient compared to what's already out there, because we need several products on the market, and they may have different safety profiles, and then there may be a benefit anyway to have them on the market. Sometimes we don't have this comparison in the file, but we can approve the product anyway because we have information on efficacy and safety compared to placebo, and in some instances that may indeed be enough. This is a very, very big issue, and I could talk about it a long time, but I won't do that because in the interest of time. Finally, the last question, how to communicate. Well, we have different ways of communication. The SMPC, the Summary of Product Characteristics. This is a key part of each marketing authorization. Here, the data is presented, the data that supports a positive benefit risk. If you want to know how we came to a positive benefit risk, then you should look in the EPAR, the European Public Assessment Report, where we try to explain this as well as possible. We know we have different recipients for these for our conclusions, and prescribers, patients, HTAs, payers, who may have somewhat different preferences concerning what information they find important. And we try as well as we can to accommodate all these different requirements. I guess we can improve, and we're trying to improve constantly. So to conclude, benefits must always outweigh the risks, of course. We try to identify the condition, population for which it is established that this is the case. And how we do it, we describe the findings and the findings that we can evaluate and that are sensitive to pick up a drug effect. And then we evaluate these and try to understand the relevance of both benefits and risks. And as I just said, communication is important, and we're trying to do that as good as we can to accommodate the needs from different stakeholders. So I think that was my last slide. Yes?
Thank you very much, Christina.
Thank you very much. So I think this is a very, very good example of Swedish efficiency. So to put very clear to you something that is really complicated. And I think you've been very, very good with time, Christina. So we can have now around maybe 10 minutes of questions on the topic, if you would be interested really to hear your views on that.
Maybe I can start with the first question. Christina, do you remember an example where, for example, you were rapporteur and where the discussion in CHMP on the benefit of risk was quite hot, and what were how people reacted to benefit and risk, and maybe from an example it would show a little bit the.
Well, I think we have these discussions almost all the time, and it's difficult to pick out a certain example. But I think sometimes, when it comes to benefits, maybe it's a bad thing to say, but sometimes the benefits are not immense. You wish they were all the time, but sometimes they may be a bit marginal, and then there may be different positions in the CHMP if you think that benefit is really of relevance or not. I think that's a discussion we have. Risks, I don't think as products who really have serious complications, serious risks, they never reach us, I think. The companies are not really pursuing those. But of course, sometimes there may be different positions concerning risks too, but not so often, I think. And I think when it comes to risks, we need to consider the condition, because if you have a very severe condition, like a cancer or something where you may die in a year or two, of course, maybe you can tolerate some risks if you have a benefit. So I think we all a lot of time talk to experts and talk to patients. What can you tolerate and what can you not tolerate?
Okay, well, maybe in that order, we have 3 words. Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would just like to comment on your use of patients in the benefit risk process, because we already know that regulators are more risk averse than, say, stage 4 cancer patients, who, while you are saying you have to assess the risk, what they think of as benefit is also hope of benefit. So I think this is something. And then we also know that going down the process, HTAs and then even the payers will be very much picking up on your regulation advice. And they will pick out, as you said, quite clearly that they're going to look at different things. How can we make sure that the regulators are erring on the side of making it easier for the HTA and payers to carry on with your decision?
No, that's a very good question, and we have several initiatives ongoing, meetings with the EUNETA, for instance, the HTA organization, and we have advice procedures together with those stakeholders too. So we try to, I think, Jordi, maybe you want to answer that more, but I think during the years I've been in the CHMP, we are increasing these cooperations and trying to accommodate their needs too. But of course, for instance, like when we're talking about relative benefit risk, for instance, we may not need a comparative study to another product to assess benefit risk, but from an HTA perspective, that may be very important to know what this adds to the already available. So we can improve, but I think the work is ongoing, I think we can say.
And if I may complement that, I would like to say, we're conscious that, as you can see, the discussion on benefit risk is really data discussion and a conclusion of that. So there's a part which is very objective, when we are not judging, but then the other one is really a balance. And we are conscious that the communication of that is very difficult in writing sometimes. I mean, as good as we can be in medical writing. So we have even explored the possibility to have a dialogue with other stakeholders, HTAs, payers, in order to communicate how we have seen the risk and the benefits and how this balance was reached. Because we're conscious that then they have to take decisions afterward. And sometimes, they may be more leaning towards one of the aspects and then don't understanding why we were positive in the end. So, but that's work in progress. So thank you. I have here you and then Peter and then Oda.
Thank you. My name is Dubravka Kostialová, HMA, the Czech NCA. And I would like to ask a more general question as regards the work at CHMP. Is it nowadays more balanced or still a huge amount of work falls on the shoulders of several strong agencies?
Well, no, but I think of course some agencies have more resources. I think we have to understand that. That, for instance, where I come from a rather big agency. We are privileged in having a lot of assessors, so we can do a lot of work. I think all members of the CHMP are contributing, but of course some of them don't have that support from back home. So I think it's just not possible for everyone to contribute to the same extent. Well, yes, I think. I let's put it like this. Maybe this is also for you, Jordi. But from my own perspective, I think that we have a lot of the members are really more and more speaking up more and trying to contribute. So yes, I think I can say that it is better than when I started like 8 years ago. Yeah.
Christina, you know, I'm an ex-colleague of you, and I'm now working for the International Alliance for Biological Standardization. Benefit risk is a very complex, and I would like to make it even a bit more complex, because in the EU, you are responsible for licenses in Europe. However, we are living in a globalized world, and what could be seen as a negative benefit risk in the EU could be completely different in Africa. And let me give you the example of a rotavirus. We have 2 rotavirus vaccines on the market. They have both a small increase of interception of a few cases per 100,000 per year. But let us assume that next CHMP, there is a report on the table that this has increased with a factor of 2 or 3. And I could imagine that CHMP would say, yeah, the benefit risk has changed. It's negative. But it's not negative for Africa. And you would take them from the market, and they would go from the market in the EU and probably in the whole world. Because if it is raining in London, yeah, it's raining everywhere.
Yeah. No, I don't have a good answer to that. Of course, we, as you well know, we are making benefit risk assessments from an EU perspective. But of course, I understand your point that it can have consequences for other parts of the world. Yes, I understand that.
Fabrizio De Ponti from the University of Bologna. I had 2 questions. One is partly related to the last one. When you have to evaluate benefit risk, considering the target population, which is the European population, and you have data from other parts of the world, how do you handle the situation? And the other question regards the special circumstances when you evaluate drugs and provide authorization under special circumstances. A few more details on the cases or examples is possible.
Yeah, okay. I think your last question, I think someone will talk about that later on when it comes to different kinds of approvals. So I will leave that for that presentation. When it comes to data from other parts of the world, we have that situation now that many studies are performed, all multinational studies performed in all parts of the world. We have just finalized the new ICH guidance, the 17, on how to plan such studies. When it comes to assessing the data, we do that on a case-by-case basis, and it depends a bit on. I don't think that the patients need to be from the EU, and you should also remember that the population of the EU is very diverse. So we look at the data if it's representative for the EU population. I think that it wouldn't be a problem to accept data from the US for certain indications, because it depends also on the condition, I think. For instance, conditions where you have very subjective endpoints I was talking about, like fibromyalgia, there it may differ between different parts of the world, also between US and EU, I think. So it is a case-by-case conclusion, I think. But for some, like take an example, blood pressure, of course we can take a blood pressure study from the US and have that for the EU. Yeah.
And on this topic, just to let you know, the last time we looked, we had about 80% of the data coming in support of marketing authorization application coming from all over the world. So meaning there were a mix of European trials and US trials. And there is a very frequent misconception that we require EU trials for marketing authorization in the EU. But also in respect of other things we do at EMA, which are so-called Article 58 opinions, where we assess on behalf of other countries, and in particular of many African countries, but not just, and you will see that later on today. We look at the condition of use in the country, not in Europe. So it depends also, there is, I would say, an intelligent approach to the use of, and just remember that Africa is not one country. It's actually very different countries with different conditions of use, different level of healthcare, different, heat and humidity. So there are lots of things that in fact affect the way we judge, but we are never requiring only EU data. Lifestyle can be an important element. Going back to the US, for obesity, for example, the level of obesity is not the same, the reason for obesity are not the same, so that may affect the judgment.
Claudio Viscoli from infectious disease clinician from Italy. I would like to touch a very burning point, which is the point of the new antibiotics. So I would like to know what is the position of the EMA against the use about the approval of new antibiotics that are active against multidrug-resistant pathogens, especially those that are active against multidrug-resistant pathogens. Because recently I've seen that the EMA has been a little bit more liberal, let's say, in approval of at least one of the more recent drugs, in contrast with the position of FDA, which has been more, let's say, traditional. So, in general, what is the position of the approval for new antibiotics? What your requirements? The requirement has changed. I understand it's a very big issue, but it's a burning problem everywhere in the world, and especially in some European countries, including mine, unfortunately.
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to really. I know we have updated some guidelines, but.
Yeah, maybe I can. Again, I'm not an anti-infectives specialist. What I can say is that we are really aware of the issue, of the public health issue, current and future, in terms of the lack of development of antibiotics. Multidrug resistance is a very huge problem, not only for infectious diseases, but also the way antibiotics support other medical interventions. So that's very clear for us. So that we are very conscious. And it's true, what we have done is that we have tried through, particularly our working parties, to look into the guidelines, what's the level of evidence we need. And because antibiotics are very particular type of drugs in terms of the data we need for marketing authorization. And it's true that we have, because of the pressure, I think, of the public health issue, we have become maybe, what you can say, a bit more liberal on that. So we are making efforts on that. And also what we are doing is trying to help internationally many initiatives that are trying to deal with antimicrobial resistance, not even from a, I would say, product point of view, but even from a policy point of view. So we are really supporting that. But to be honest with you, the big problem with that is that the pipeline is quite poor. And that's something that we have limited, really, I would say, influence in. So we would like to see more products and to be more positive. But the problem that as regulators, if we don't have applications, we are a bit frustrated about that. But definitely we keep a very open mind on that.
A fast track for new antibiotics or not?
Well, we don't call it a fast track, but we have indeed been considering, different levels, in terms of authorization of antibiotics. And we have, I cannot announce that, but we have some ideas, in place in order to really incentivize, the submission of applications. I had 2 more interventions over there and then at the back.
Thank you. Mary Malokia. I'm a researcher with an interest in drug safety from King's College London. One of the challenges that we found is there's currently no standardised reporting of harms, particularly from clinical trials. And so I think this is an area of unmet need, both in how we report our harms, but also how we analyse them. Currently, the methods are really quite simplistic in many cases. Do you have any ideas how you might address this in terms of trying to enhance the quality of risk or harm reporting for trials?
Well, I don't think we in the CHMP has any initiative concerning this right now. But of course, what you're saying is very important because we can only assess the data that is provided to us. And of course, we are interested in having data of as good quality as possible. I think you will have a presentation in the afternoon concerning safety assessments and so on. So maybe you can hang on to that question and get a more expanded response later on in the afternoon.
Yesterday, we also had a presentation on the new clinical trial regulation, which also mandates the publication of trials, and there will be an element of safety to be reported as a part of the reporting. So we hope also to make safety in trials more visible and more accessible to everybody.
Thank you. I think we have there a word.
Yes, thank you. I am Tari Rositole from the Medicines Control Authority of Zimbabwe. I have 3 questions, not so much to do with benefit risk, but the process of assessment. I want to find out how much time you give to companies to respond to questions. There's a slide you presented with day 80, day 120. Is it the same for all types of medicines, say, for example, small molecules versus biologicals? And then my 3rd question would be, I think you stated that there are templates that are used by your assessors. Are these EMA templates, or do rapporteurs use their individual country templates? And how do you standardize assessments between different countries?
Well, I start from the end. The templates are EMA templates, and the EMA try to update them on a regular basis, but they are then used in all member states. And what we are talking about now is a centralized procedure for approval, which is the way most new chemical entities are approved, I would say. And the timelines, day 80, day 120, and so on, are the ones that are applicable to all products that are applying through the centralized regulatory procedure. The time for companies to respond after, the first list of questions that is sent to the companies, that is taken, concluded by the CHMP is day 120. And the companies have 3 months is the general time to respond. Sometimes they want to respond earlier, and they can do that if they like. And sometimes they want some extra time, and then we usually say that that's okay if they want 1 or 2 or maybe 3 months extra. And then in the next rounds, after day 180 and so on, the time is shorter, maybe a month or so. But also there, we can approve a prolonged clock stop in some cases, but that is up to the CHMP to decide. Was it something more? Was that?
Time to response 180.
Yeah. Was it?
Sorry, 180.
Yeah, 1 month. Did I cover it? Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
And do we give the same time to all companies, or do we have shorter assessment time?
Well, we have shorter. Well, after the first time, after day 120, it's in general is 3 months. But as I said, the company can respond earlier if they.
For the assessment itself, day 80 or shorter?
Our assessment. Yes. Our assessment is shorter. We have 80 days, but then we only have one, like a couple of weeks in the later procedures for the assessment. So it's quite strict towards the end of the procedure.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 more interventions, and then I think we'll have to move to the next. No, we leave it. Okay, good, good. No, I'm fine. I'm from the south of Europe, so I'm very flexible with time.
And I'm from Sweden.
For once, I'm
So we
not in
have
a
a
rush.
clash.
Normally, I'm in a rush, not this time.
Okay, so there and then we come back.
Hey, I'm Ilana Weiss from the Israeli Ministry of Health Drug Registration Department. I would like to ask if you can please elaborate regarding a comparison of the new medicine to either placebo or existing treatment, current treatments, please.
Yes, that is. I skipped over that quite quickly because it is of course a very difficult area. But I think, I mean, the gold standard for a study should be against placebo, I think, because that's where you really can compare and really get a feeling for both the effect and the safety. Whether you should have an active comparator for something that is already approved or not, I think there may be different positions there. I think for some conditions, serious conditions that progress fast, like cancer, you need to have an active comparator because you don't want to prove something that is worse, that is not as efficient as what is out there, because then there's a loss of chance for the patients. And also maybe if you have a product, new product where you're a bit uncertain about the safety profile, you might want to compare it to something else. But I think there is what was said before. I think there are different stakeholders have different wishes there. I think from a purely regulatory point of view, we can often it can be enough with the placebo control, I think, but maybe we need to think more about the other stakeholders too. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question about withdrawal of applications, though you didn't mention it directly. It was mentioned yesterday. And I was wondering whether the CHMP has a role in withdrawal, whether you sometimes ask people to withdraw their applications, or how do these withdrawals come about?
Can come up in different ways. I think some of it will come up in another presentation here, where we have conditions to the marketing authorization that has to be fulfilled. But I think someone will talk about that conditional marketing authorization. Then we can withdraw it if they don't fulfill the condition. Otherwise, it's mostly based on safety signals and safety issues, and then it's mostly it's the PRAC who performs the pharmacovigilance risk assessment committee who performs the assessment. But that happens. The safety signals, safety issues comes up. I think that is I would guess that's the most common reason for withdrawing a product. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe we move to the next presentation. Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much. So, that was great. Okay.
Yes, hello, good morning. My name is Andrea Taft, and I have been here at the agency for more than 10 years in various positions. But recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, I have been involved in the Guideline Consistency Group as the coordinator and supporter from the EMA side. So it's a great pleasure to be here today and to talk to you about the use of experts, scientific expertise across the EU, and then also about the development of scientific guidelines. So my talk will be then divided maybe into 2 parts. First of all, the role of the experts, the role of the committee, CHMP, their working parties, the scientific advisory groups. And then I'll go straight into the guidelines, what type of guidelines we have, and what is the process of developing a guideline. I'll talk about the Guideline Consistency Group as well, and then other supportive documents that we have here at the EMA when we are dealing with marketing authorizations. Perhaps you have seen this slide before, but I think it's important to start from the very beginning. In the assessment of marketing authorizations, the EMA supports 7 scientific committees, and in each one of them, the member states have pulled their sovereignty together. That means that the member states get together on behalf of the national authorities, and they assess and then control the medicinal product that's already placed on the market. So we have the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, for Veterinary Products, for Orphan Medicinal Products, Pediatrics, Herbals, the Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products, and also for the assessment of risk and pharmacovigilance. I will not talk in detail about every single committee. I will mainly talk about the CHMP, because that's the committee that I work closely with, and that's where the scientific guidelines that I'll talk about later are used for human medicinal products. Okay, so what are the main tasks of the CHMP? Christina already talked about the scientific opinions and about the benefit-risk assessment. The scientific opinion is sent either to the European Commission or WHO, and the benefit-risk balance is based on three main pillars: the quality, safety, and efficacy of a medicinal product. Furthermore, we deal with the European scientific guidelines or policies, so CHMP develops these ones. This is one of their main remits. We also give scientific advice or protocol assistance to companies that wish to come for marketing authorization to us, and they have questions about how to develop their product and how to base their strategy for development. The scientific committees have their established working parties or scientific advisory groups, and I will talk about these in details in my next slides. And we also very much collaborate with international regulators, with ICH, WHO, but also with national authorities outside of EU, such as Swissmedic, Health Canada, etc. This, by no means, is an exhaustive list of activities of the CHMP. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, very high level, and the CHMP is not alone, actually, in their function. So how does it really work, and what is the expertise that we have across the EU? So in the middle of it is the CHMP with all the members on behalf of the member states, but they are supported by such called working parties. We have two types of working parties. The first ones are the standing working parties. There are more overarching general. So you can see I've listed all of them there, such as Safety Working Party, Scientific Advice Working Party. And we also have therapeutic or more sort of clinical, let's say, working parties that are not so much overarching, but they are focused on certain therapeutic area. Again, you have the whole extensive list on the slide. Further support to the CHMP is given from the external experts that do not come from the authorities, but these are the experts in the scientific advisory groups, and they come from the field itself, so from hospitals or clinics. Again, you have the list of established scientific advisory groups on the screen. However, when it comes to specific questions, the committee can ask an ad hoc expert group to be convened at the EMA, and that's when it's outside of the remit of the established SAGs, so scientific advisory groups. So what is the difference between a working party and the scientific advisory group? The working party is composed of members from the specific scientific field, and these are not representative of the national authorities, but true experts in the field. They can come from the national authorities, but it's irrespective of a member state. So if there are 3 members from UK and 6 members from Czech Republic, that's absolutely fine, as long as they are real experts. So they give advice in development of products, but also mainly the scientific guidance documents that I'll talk about later. The drafting groups are also asked and convened here at the EMA. They can be asked by the CHMP to be composed at the time when there is a need for a guideline, but it does not fall into any of the working parties' remits. So currently, for example, we have drafting group in the area of respiratory disease because they are revising the cystic fibrosis guideline, which has not been revised for some years, and it's the specific task of that group to do so. Scientific advisory groups, the SAGs, convene at the time when the CHMP has a very specific question at the time of assessment of the product, and we use these experts directly from the field, so that means from the hospitals, from clinics, we use patients, representatives, and they convene for 1 day here at the agency and deal with the discussion on the very specific questions that the CHMP formulated to them. So you may ask, how do we find these experts and what do we do? So here at the EMA, we are maintaining a European experts database. This is publicly available. It's on our website. I have given you the link there. All these experts are assessed based on the policy of handling the conflict of interest. You know that it's very important here to be transparent and to declare if there are any interests or any conflicts potentially. This list is publicly available. You can browse it either by country or by the name. I have just given a snapshot You can see the name, the affiliation, and what are the CVs and declaration of interest for every single person that we have. These are, of course, regularly updated. So this concludes the first part of my presentation. I will now jump into the guidelines. I will start with a little bit boring, but the definition of a guideline. This comes straight from the Hydraulics legislation. Guideline is a document with explicit legal basis referred to in the legislation framework as intended to fulfill a legal obligation laid down in the community pharmaceutical legislation. What it really means is that it is actually given some advice to marketing authorization holders, the developers, so the applicants, and competent authorities in the specific interested fields. A subgroup of these guidelines, we have many overarching general guidelines, but a subgroup of these guidelines are the scientific guidelines that we deal here mainly at EMA, and they relate to very specific scientific or clinical, non-clinical quality issues. So the legal status of a guideline is basically what we call a soft law. So it doesn't have such a legal force as, for example, a regulation in the European community, but it actually harmonizes the position in the EU on how to correctly interpret and then apply the requirements in order to demonstrate positive benefit risk, in order to demonstrate good quality, safety, and efficacy of the medicinal product. So they then facilitate not only the development, but later on also the assessment of the marketing authorization application. If the company chooses not to follow a guideline, then they have to really justify this, and this is at the time of submission and assessment very thoroughly followed, if there is any deviation. This is a list of EMA scientific guidelines, the main categories. Again, you can find all of them on our website. You can see some of them are very overarching, multidisciplinary, for example, guideline on development of fixed-dose combination products. And some of them are very, very specific, for example, asthma guideline, etc. So now I'm going to talk about the development of a scientific guideline. Believe it or not, we have a guideline on the guideline. So this is the full quote over there. And the process can be divided maybe in 3 stages. So first stage is basically the identification of a trigger. Why should we actually draft a guideline, or why should we update an existing guideline? Secondly, then there is the appointment of the lead rapporteur, so who is going to actually do the work. Then we develop a concept paper where we explain to the public how what we're planning to actually do, and we initiate a public consultation. In the second stage, we prepare actually the initial draft, the first guideline. Again, we use all the experts that I have already talked about, and we release this draft for a public consultation. Of course, we collect all the comments, and I'll give you an example towards the end of my talk. In the final stage, hopefully, after the public consultation, we have a good final version of the guideline, which we release again to be then come into force and to be implemented by the industry and also by the regulators for the assessment. So how does it work in practice in a bit more detail? I'll start with the first section, selection of topics and appointment of the rapporteurs. The various topics or triggers for a guideline preparation or update, let's say, come from various sources. So it could be a mandate from the European Commission because there is a new legislation. For example, there was the legislation on advanced therapy medicinal products, and that mandated preparation of certain guidelines, so we had to do it. Then there could be, of course, technical scientific developments because science moves very fast, so very often that triggers an update of an existing guideline. We are very much involved in international activities. Again, those kind of bodies can mandate us with the development of the guidelines, such as ICH. And last but not least, of course, individuals, learned societies, scientific committees can come forward with a proposal for a guideline update. So I mentioned the word rapporteur and co-rapporteur. Sometimes if the guidelines are more complex, so these come from the relevant working party in that field or from the scientific advisory group, and they lead the full process of drafting from the time of concept paper to the time of finalization of the guideline. So the concept paper is a very, very simple document. It's usually 2-3 pages maximum. and it really focuses on explaining to the public what we are going to do. It does not offer the solution to the issue, but only explains the trigger. Again, we have a standard template for this. In the second stage, when the initial guideline is drafted, we collect the comments from the public consultation on the concept paper, and we prepare, based again on a standard template for a scientific guideline, the first draft. I will stress the section scope here because this is very, very important for the readers to understand what actually is being described here, who is the guideline aimed at, and maybe who is the guideline not for. So this is quite an important section. This is agreed by the working party, is then forwarded to the committee, and at the level of CHMP it's adopted for a public consultation. This lasts usually 6 months. Sometimes it can be shorter, sometimes longer, but 6 months is the golden standard. We also very often proactively go out to the academics or to the learned societies and tell them, look, there is a guideline, please have a look at it, read it, and send us your comments, because we want to know straight from the field, from you, whether what we're writing here is actually true and applicable and is the latest standard. So I mentioned to you an example of a comment. We publish with every guideline, after it comes into force, a so-called overview of external comments received. I have picked here this specific guideline on lupus. You can see the stakeholders there. So we have various people, we have academics, we have industry commenting. So we assign them a so-called stakeholder number because that's easier than to read the document. So for example, in this case, stakeholder 1, FPA, sent in a comment, and they wanted to understand why the CHMP in the draft guideline wanted to have a duration of a study that was 18 months. And they justified this, explained why, for them, a shorter time period for a trial is actually reasonable and shows an effect. And indeed, in the end, the working party discussed this and decided, yes, we will change this to 12 months. So this is what you will find for every single comment that we receive on a guideline during public consultation, either the acceptance or actually not accepting the comment, but it has to be explained to the public. So this is now the last stage of drafting the guideline. We've collected all the comments, we looked at them, we've taken some on board, maybe some not. We will then finalize this guideline, publish again on our website, and it comes into force 6 months after the publication. Usually in that stage, we will organize a training. Sometimes it's for industry, but it's mainly from our side aimed at assessors and rapporteurs, because those are going to be the people that will be judging and assessing the dossiers based on the latest revision or the latest guideline. We also will have to take note whether we need to revise maybe this guideline, maybe later on, but we look at every single guideline. The working parties look at them on annual basis when they prepare their work programs, and they look whether there is a need. And we communicate all the updates, all the public consultation on our website on the What's New. So I mentioned Guideline Consistency Group. This is a very important group that meets every single month at the agency, via teleconference. And basically, it's the third pair of eyes, because very often the guidelines are drafted by several authors, sometimes even several working parties, and it can happen that the consistency is a little bit lost. So several years ago, the CHMP established this scientific, guideline consistency group that looks at the guidelines as a peer review from the consistency, scientific and regulatory consistency point of view. So we look at things like if there is a lack of contradiction or if there is any overlap with scientific advice that might have been given slightly differently than the guideline is recommending. We look at other guidelines, we look at any deviations, and we look at the template adherence so that the guidelines look as a standard document across all of them. And I think you can ask me now, how long does this whole thing take? Well, normally it's about 2 to 3 years, including also the public consultation time. But in times of need, we can actually shorten this time. You may remember the De Janeiro disaster or the clinical trial disaster in 2016 in Rennes in France, where first-in-human trial was, well, ended up with fatal cases. So the CHMP realized there is a need for an update of this guideline for first-in-human trials, and within very short time, it was under 1 year, the guideline was updated, there was a public consultation, and the guideline was put in place. And this is really my last slide. I just want to stress that apart from guidelines, CHMP and the committees across have several ways of communicating, but also rely on other different documents. So here, for example, the public statement is very often used if there is a need to immediately inform the public about a certain issue. You may have noticed a couple of days ago the Zimbrita product was withdrawn from the market, and again, rather than waiting for publication, a full assessment, there was just a public statement quickly placed on our website. The same happens in time of shortage of certain medicinal product when really the clinician need to know, I'm running out of the drug, what do I need to do? Reflection paper is also a very interesting tool that is used by the assessors and rapporteurs, because sometimes it can happen that you just don't have enough knowledge to put in place a guideline. So you can't really advise how to develop a product or how to assess it, but you want to stimulate certain discussion across the experts. So you will publish a reflection paper and hopefully invite for comments, and then be able to be in a position to one day actually prepare a guideline. So for example, we just last year published a reflection paper on extrapolation from adults to pediatrics, which is quite a hot topic. Then the question and answer document, I think that's very clear. That's just additional clarity on certain issues. If the guideline didn't capture certain things, then you can publish a Q&A for people to know what is actually meant in the guideline. We also use addendums. Addendum is also a nice way of not to reopen the whole revision that takes a long time. You can just prepare a short addendum that you add to the guideline. This very often happens for special population like pediatrics, for example. And then we have also recommendations or procedure advice documents, but they are more on the technical or administrative side. So how do I submit my dossier, or how do I use the gateway and that sort of thing. So I think this really was my last slide, and that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for this very clear presentation on what we said already. It's a very, very important topic for us. So I have a question there. Yes.
Thank you. Just to be sure, if I understood correctly, there is no need for approval from European Commission in case the new guideline is created and published.
It ends with the adoption at the CHMP.
For scientific guidelines,
Yes.
certain guidelines are prescribed by legislation and are under the remit of the Commission, and in that case, we may provide the technical content with the committees and the, of course, working parties' involvement, but the Commission will adopt the final guideline. So that depends on the nature, but we are talking about scientific guidelines which help producing a application for marketing authorization. I have two questions for you. The first one is, you receive comment from foreign other regulatory authorities like FDA, Japan, and so on in your guidelines. And the second one is, what is the role of academia in drafting the guideline?
So for the first question, we do receive from other authorities as well. Even we receive from research institutions. I had recently in one of my revisions comments from Australian university. So yes, these are taken into account, of course. But when you look at the overview, that is more. The overview is aimed for publication of external comments, and external are considered those ones that don't come from the regulatory network. So you will not find those ones published, but yes, they are considered. And the role of academia, I think it's very much stressed precisely in the public consultation, because from my own example, I am dealing with the revision of the cystic fibrosis guideline. We actually sent out very proactively during the public consultation letters, emails with the guideline asking for comments, and we had very, very good response. So they are directly involved during precisely that phase.
Peter, please.
I love the guidelines
Good.
However, there is a backside on it as well, because it induces tick box assessment. It's in the guideline, yes, in the guideline, yes. But guidelines sometimes are too old or too strict. If we talk about vaccines, the low-hanging fruit has been taken away. Now it is the high-hanging fruit. And the high-hanging fruit doesn't fit in the guideline. And then if you go for scientific advice, I have seen a paragraph from a scientific advice, a national scientific advice. If you follow the guideline, you will not be able to develop your product. Comma, however, you should follow the guideline. That was a comment, not a question.
No, it's understood. Yes, I know. And the process of revising and redrafting, obviously, it's not the easiest. But if there is a justification, I think CHMP. I don't know, Christina, you wanted to help here, but I think that we do have cases where there is a deviation, and very often it is really fully justified, or maybe the guideline came out just before the development was finalized, and the whole development is done on the previous version. Then of course this is taken into account, and maybe some issues are then resolved in the post-authorization by additional studies or additional tests that need to be done. But I think CHMP does take into account valid explanations or justifications.
I'm Paola Minghetti from Italy, University of Milan. We have some problems sometimes in the national level, that is means national authorization or decentralized authorization, because it happened, as you told now, that the CTD is prepared before the adoption of the guideline.
Of course.
And then you have the problem, what we have to do. We have set the old one, or we have to ask to be compliant. And the second question is, if it is a generic, for example, for quality guideline, it could be that the originator has done the study with the old guideline, for example, impurities or something like that, and you ask to the generic to follow the new guideline, so they are not equivalent at the end. That's I don't know how we can solve, but it's a problem.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think when it comes to, I mean, we're talking about scientific development, so it would be a bit naive to believe that we can really take a snapshot of something, keep the guideline, and that will be there forever. So I mean, probably guidelines are quite old after we publish them. To be honest with you, we've taken also into account the time it takes. But then I think we have to rely on the work of the colleagues at the CHMP, at the scientific advice, where they have to look into the scientific issues, and then if there are justifications about deviation, then we'll take that into account.
So probably if you do a reflection paper or something like that for the national authority, it could be fine. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, two words there, and then we'll have to
because we have more presentation, and we can continue the discussion.
Sami Ohini, FDA, Ghana. I'd like to know whether the procedures you've described apply to herbal medicines also the same way.
So I said I was talking about the guidelines that fall under the remit of the CHMP in this particular presentation, but equally for the other committees, each one of them will have the set of their own guidelines. So on our website, if you go under the Herbal Committee, you will find all the guidelines or guidance documents that were adopted by this Herbal Committee for the medicinal products for this use.
Steve Anderson, FDA. So do you have so I'm just trying to understand the process. Do you have a sort of a public comment period as well? Because you have opportunities, obviously, for stakeholder input and for scientific experts input, but so I might have missed it. But so I was just wondering if you had opportunities for public comment and then how you handle public comments.
Yes, that's that one. The first public consultation is on the concept paper, on that short document that just sets out the main goals for the revision or for the new guideline. And the second one is the 6 months when the first initial draft is prepared. So this is announced on our website. As I said, 6 months, but can be shorter or longer.
And then does that also, is that included in your sort of 2-month period for a guidance to be sort of finalized, or?
You mean the final version when it comes into usually when the CHMP adopts the guideline, this is published, and then we give 6 months to the developers to get familiar with the guideline, and then also have some maybe training from our side for the assessors, and only after the 6 months the guideline comes into force.
So the public consultation is not the same as the implementation time. Yeah. I think we need to move on because we have still more presentation and our colleagues are waiting. So I give the floor to my colleague Evdokia, who is going to moderate this session.
Thank you very much. Christina presented the scientific elements that we take into account to establish the benefit risk. And now I have the pleasure to introduce two very experienced procedure managers, that is Malgorzata Zgenovic and Carlos Aicardo, that will take you through how do the uncertainties around the benefit risk translate into different types of approvals. There was a question about exceptional and commitments at the time of the authorization. And also, how do we as regulators ensure that the benefit risk remains positive throughout the life of a product? So how do we inform the benefit risk based on the information we get from safety, from the wider use, or from the ongoing development of the product? And that will be the presentation from Carlos. In the interest of time, I give them the floor, and I hope you enjoy the presentations.
Thank you, Evdokia. Good morning, everyone. So just to manage expectations, we kind of move from the level of headquarters to the level of infantry now, and we will be talking more about the procedural aspects. So my presentation is about the type of approvals and commitments from the procedural point of view, more or less, but we will talk about a concept a little bit as well. So this is the outline of the presentation. You would have heard about some concepts already, so I will just, in the interest of time, glide over those slides. So what does it mean, actually, approval in the EU system? What types of approvals we have, i.e. standard versus non-standard, and how those are linked to the post-approval commitments in relation to the data package submitted at the outset of the process. So this you would have seen already numerous times. Approval in our system means that there is a positive licensing committee opinion based on positive benefit risk, and there is a commission decision, which is the actual act allowing placing the product on the market. The commission takes usually around 2 months, and the whole process is called decision-making process. And ideally, we would like to see at the outset of the approval process a full comprehensive clinical data package, but it does not always happen. That's why we have settings in a post-approval lifetime of the product, which are there to provide more data. And these can be commitments in the risk management plan. And as part of those, there can be studies as a part of the pharmacovigilance plan. There can be conditions to the marketing authorization to provide more efficacy or safety data. And there can be specific obligations, which more or less mean the same, provision of more clinical efficacy or safety data. However, those are reserved to the non-standard marketing authorizations, which are marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances and conditional marketing authorization. So if this is quite a crucial slide for this presentation. So if you manage to keep it in mind, I think it's already a success from my point of view. So here you can see the types of approval plotted against the comprehensiveness of data package. And if we start from the bottom and look at the yellow arrow, we can see that in case of marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, the comprehensiveness of clinical data package will be the lowest. And hence, as a consequence, the level of evidence, of clinical evidence, will never reach the 100% dotted line that is reserved for full marketing authorization. Therefore, in this setting, you will for sure see obligations as a part of the marketing authorization for provision of more clinical data. If we move a step up to the red arrow, there you can see a conditional marketing authorization, which is a stepwise approach to gathering clinical data. So at the first step, the clinical data package will be limited. However, it will allow the licensing committee to approve the product. And there will be obligations as a part of the marketing authorization, and fulfillment of those obligations ideally should take the level of evidence to the 100% bar that you have for a full marketing authorization. And then full marketing authorization, which is depicted here with a blue arrow. This is the one where at the outset of the process we would expect a full comprehensive clinical data package. It does not mean that the licensing committee or the safety committee will not see a need for further data submission post-approval, but it's relatively rare, and there will be a slide with some statistics on how often it happens. So now this is the second part of the presentation. We move to a more detailed and sort of procedural / regulatory information. So for marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances, the prerequisite is that the company won't be able to gather a comprehensive clinical data, and it's not possible because either the indication is very rare or condition is very rare, or at the current state of scientific knowledge, it's simply not possible to do it, or there are some ethical considerations which would not allow gathering the comprehensive clinical data package. Hence, the switch to the full marketing authorization is not possible. And if you remember the preceding slide, this is the yellow arrow, which does not go up to the dotted 100% line. And here I pulled off some statistic from our external website. These are the products which are currently indicated on the EMA website as under exceptional circumstances. And for most of them, the criterion to grant the marketing authorization was the rarity of the condition. For one product, it was the ethical considerations. And for one plus the pandemic vaccines, it was the state of knowledge at the time of approval that did not allow to grant full marketing authorization because there was not enough clinical data to do that. And in terms of, this is not shown on this slide, but in terms of the therapeutic areas that mainly fall under this type of marketing authorization, it's rare cancers or rare metabolic diseases, inherited metabolic diseases, and some infectious diseases. So here I've pulled up a couple of examples from our external website. So this is where you can find information, but you would have seen already these similar slides yesterday. You can find information here about the products and why they are approved. What was the basis of granting a given type of marketing authorization? So, for example, for dinutuximab beta for neuroblastoma, the marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances was granted because the committee felt that it's not ethical to ask the company to run placebo-controlled trials, given that this is the current golden standard of the treatment of neuroblastoma. Hence, for this particular authorization, both arms of the pivotal studies had the test product, and committee felt this is how it should be. For Brineura, which is a product for, and I will move here because it's quite a tricky indication, late infantile neuronal ceroid lipofuscinosis type 2, which is a inherited enzymatic deficiency. Here you can see on the slide how the path from limited clinical data through uncertainty to imposing certain obligation is constructed. So for this particular product, the marketing authorization was based on practically one study, which was open label, single arm, and not even with a fully established dose, i.e. dose escalation study, with very limited number of children. And the data was complemented by an extension study. So a committee felt that there are uncertainties. The benefit risk is positive, hence the granting of the marketing authorization is possible. And the main uncertainties were in relation to long-term safety and the lack of data in some age ranges. So as an obligation to this marketing authorization, an efficacy and safety study was imposed, and the safety study, and you can see the details. I think are we running out of time? No, we're not. We're not.
You need to
okay.
Yeah.
So this, I will just glide over this slide because my colleague Carlos will talk about the cyclical assessment of the benefit risk post-approval. So this is what is happening for marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances. The process is called annual reassessment, happens annually, but the marketing authorization is valid for 5 years, renewable. And now we move on to a conditional marketing authorization. There was a little note on the slide with the arrows that this is a part of the PRIME toolbox, and I think you would have heard about it yesterday. So toolbox for early access. And for a product to be authorized via this route, it needs to fall within one of the scopes that you can see on the left-hand side. So it addresses seriously debilitating or life-threatening disease, or is to be used in emergency situations from public health point of view, or is an orphan medicinal product. And marketing authorization needs to fulfill all the criteria that you have on the right-hand side. So, well, that's quite obvious. Risk-benefit balance is positive. It provides an answer to unmet medical need by offering major therapeutic advantage. And the benefit to public health because of the earlier access of the product is higher than the risk that still remain because of the limited data that underpin the marketing authorization. But we would expect by fulfillment of obligations that the level of evidence will be elevated to the level of full marketing authorization, and that the switch will be possible. And here are some statistics. These are statistics taken from a report that was published on the external website on the 10th anniversary of this type of marketing authorization. You can see that the products were falling within main scopes of being for debilitating or life-threatening conditions, or being an orphan product, and there is a significant overlap because for the product to be an orphan product, it also needs to address the seriously debilitating or life-threatening disease. And the main therapeutic areas are similar, oncology and infectious diseases, some products in the area of central nervous system. And in terms of fulfillment of the obligations, around 70% of the obligations were fulfilled within the given time frame, which is quite good, and it was usually around 4 years. So it's taken around 4 years for marketing authorization to reach the level of evidence of the full marketing authorization post-approval. In 90% of the cases, the imposed obligations, the scope for them did not change, meaning that at the time of imposition they must have been relevant and tailored to the lack of data, and mainly it was to collect clinical data. And again, there is a cyclical process of reviewing benefit risk of those products. which for the CMA is called annual renewal, because this authorization is valid for 1 year, renewable. And as I mentioned already, it is meant to provide at some point enough data to switch to a full standard marketing authorization. So now this is the sort of golden standard, the full standard marketing authorization. As you can see, around 30% of those can also come with conditions. And in this particular setting, we don't talk about obligations, we talk about conditions. And the 70% does not come with conditions. When the conditions are requested or imposed to this type of marketing authorization, they really need to be justified by the committee, as the expectation is that for this type of approval, the clinical data package is comprehensive. So it's not something that comes automatically as it is the case with obligations for the previous two types of marketing authorization. And here you can see, again, two examples. For Mavyret, which is a fixed dose combination for chronic hepatitis C. This time the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee felt that there is a need to mandate a safety study, because PRAC has done an review of all of the safety of all those products, and was of the opinion that there may be a link to a de novo or recurrent hepatocellular carcinoma. That's why PRAC felt that it is that given the mechanism of action of Mavyret, it is the same condition should be mandated. And if we move to Zavicefta, this is one of the rare occasions where you actually see as a condition request for efficacy data. And this happened because at the time of approval, the company had clinical trials supporting 3 of the 4 requested indications. So for the indication in nosocomial pneumonia, the study was ongoing. But the results already available at the time of approval were promising enough for the committee to credit the product with all 4 indications. But this ongoing study was mandated as a condition, and it was quite promptly fulfilled. And now this marketing authorization is a standard marketing authorization without conditions. And here it's my penultimate slide. This you can see the recap of the information for all types of marketing authorizations, just as a maybe go-to promemoria slide. And here the take-home message. So as you would have seen, the comprehensiveness of the data package will decide what type of marketing authorization is granted, and the commitments will be tailored to the uncertainties and the gaps in the data package submitted at the outset. And thank you very much. I've got the other 2 slides with glossary and references, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much, Malgorzata, and thank you also for bringing the examples that help you visualize the different types so you don't get lost into the jargon. Any questions? Yes, please. It's the one at the back. The one at the back.
Hi, Mariana Santos from UNDP. Just a question regarding the difference between exceptional and conditional. I got a question about, for instance, the pandemic vaccines. I saw that you still provided exceptional approval for about 5%. 5% of the exceptional approvals were for pandemic vaccines. But I also saw under conditional that you cover emergencies and threats, etc. So which are these sort of vaccines that are approved, pandemic vaccines that are approved under exceptional, and why are they not approved under conditional? That's one question. Second question, about rarity. So you mentioned that exceptional approvals, they cover rarity. So when it's a medicine for a rare disease, I would suppose. But then conditional, it also covers orphan medicines, which is also for a rare disease. Can these overlap somehow? That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, so the pandemic vaccine question baffled me as well, and I went back to kind of what we've done historically. So I understand, but this is really by listening to the presentations that we've had in the past in relation to pandemic situation. I understand that back then in 2007-8, we had two types of approvals for pandemic vaccines. For those that were submitted with so-called core dossier or mock-up, ready for insertion of the pandemic virus during the pandemic. Those were granted exceptional circumstances because at the time of approval, there was simply not enough knowledge to know what's going to be in the dossier. But those who were filed during the pandemic were following the conditional path. I understand that the Commission took stock after 2009, and nowadays they go all through conditional, but I'm not really an expert in this area.
I think really what makes a difference is the hope you can have to have additional data at some point in time. When the pandemic was finished, we could not get any more data. That was one of the issues we had. So when the committee chooses one of these options, it has in mind the possibility to get data. And just maybe to anticipate your answer on orphan versus rare, not all orphan diseases are that rare that you cannot get more data. When you have 20 patients in Europe, you cannot get more than 20 patients. So you know there is no hope of getting more data. You can follow those patients, but you cannot have more patients included. But in some disease, you have thousands of patients. They're still rare, but you have thousands of patients, so you can hope to get more data.
Any other questions?
Yes, please.
Steve Anderson, FDA. So I was just wondering, what do you do in the case of, I mean, we face this a number of times as well, so I'll put you on the spot. What do you do when you face circumstances where the sponsor can't meet their obligations, either under sort of the standard or under the conditional approval?
Well, legally speaking, the studies that either are part of the risk management plan as a in the pharmacovigilance plan, or the conditions or the obligations, they are binding. There is a plethora of regulatory actions, i.e., but maybe Christina can add to this. Committee can ask the company to come for oral explanation, or the chairman can send a letter, or there can be an inspection, or there can be so-called naming and shaming by, publishing those data. But I understand that we also have, for some situations, penalties, financial penalties, and I think that the kind of heaviest gun would be suspension or revocation or not renewing marketing authorization.
So for conditional approval, though, I just assume they wouldn't get further approval. The final, the conditional is a conditional, so they wouldn't get final approval.
But I see your point. I think we have, you probably have the same problem as we have, because of course, formally, if you don't fulfill a condition, if you can't perform the study, we shouldn't renew the product. But of course, in reality, that is a very difficult step to take if it is a product that is out there and patients are benefiting from that treatment. So I think this is a very difficult task, and I don't think we have done that really yet, as far as I know, to withdraw a product because they can't perform a study, even though we have really legally, we could do that. So I think, as I said before, mostly we withdraw products based on safety issues.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean,
Sorry, if I can I, maybe because we have actually analyzed how companies have fulfilled their obligation. So we have the data to show that over the last more than 5 years, actually companies have fulfilled their obligation. to 100%. We have all received all the data that were supposed to be received. Sometimes they ask for an extension of the time frame, but they have all submitted, after the agreed time frame, they have all submitted the data. So there is also this idea that companies never fulfill their obligation when they get the marketing authorization, but in practice they do, at least in Europe they do. And I think, as was mentioned, one of the worst situation would be to withdraw the marketing authorization because it deprives the patient from a product which may potentially be still useful. Depends on the situation, of course, but that would be punishing the patient. The company would not make money out of it, but it's mostly punishing the patient. So that's a difficult situation and decision to make.
And I would say that we face that as well at times, and there's not necessarily a good solution because the sponsor can have, there can be a legitimate reason why they can't enroll patients into a study. There's just not enough patients to enroll in the study as expected. So.
And as Agnes mentioned, we have good data to show that they always submit the studies. In many cases, there are delays because it has to do with the timing, the feasibility to recruit patients and things like that. So that's quite reassuring. Any other questions? No? Okay, then we can move to Carlos. Thank you very much. That will brief us about how does the benefit risk is informed throughout the life cycle of the product.
Thank you, Dokia. Good morning to the audience and greetings to the audience that we have online, following us online today. So my name is Carlos Ricardo Muñoz, and I will be now covering the benefit risk assessment throughout the life cycle of the medicinal product. Well, the good news for me is that the method used to evaluate the benefit risk has been already covered by Christina, so that makes great part of my job. So I will be focusing more on the regulatory aspects and in which situations and we reevaluate the benefit risk throughout the product life cycle. So what is our knowledge on the benefit risk of medicinal product? Well, this pretty much depends on the point of the life cycle of the product that we are referring to. Certainly, at the time of marketing authorization, a positive benefit risk balance is based on sufficient evidence on the efficacy and also good evidence on what are the most common adverse reactions. Yeah? But these studies are done as clinical trials in which we have a controlled population, very limited in number. So we lack of information in terms, for example, how is this drug going to behave when it is used in real clinical practice for a population that might be slightly different, that has not been going in the clinical trial, for example. Or we also lack information on whether there are going to be very rare but serious adverse reactions. That's what we call idiosyncratic adverse reaction. To put you into a context, I'm making a comparison with an iceberg. At the time of authorization, we can see what is above the sea, but this is only a small part on the knowledge of the benefit risk for the medicinal product. So at the time of market authorization, the approval decision is based on uncertainty. But this is based on approval on acceptable levels of uncertainty. And this uncertainty doesn't come free for the market authorization holder. In fact, a risk management plan is agreed at the time of authorization, and this is aimed to further identify, characterize, and minimize the risk. Okay? There will be a presentation later on that will cover risk management plan. So what exactly happened during approval? During the life cycle of the medicinal product, 3 different activities may or will take place. And I will explain now why some of them may and some others will certainly take place. Yeah? The first activities that is worth to mention is periodic evaluation of the benefit risk. This is in order to evaluate all the safety, all the emerging safety data that is linked to the use of the medicinal product. And this is required, it's a legal and regulatory requirement. Then we have all the activities related to, with the development and maintenance of the medicinal product. And these companies usually bring new solutions for patients, But it's not only to bring new solution for patients, but it's also to ensure the supply chain of the medicinal product. And also to keep the medicinal product up to date with the knowledge we have with the use of this medicinal product. Finally, we have an ad hoc evaluation of the benefit risk of the product. And this happens when there is a serious concern on the aspect of safety, efficacy, and quality of the medicinal product. So the first two activities will certainly take place for a medicinal product, whereas the last one only takes place when there is a concern, usually a safety concern. So all these previous activities take place because we have new knowledge about the medicinal product. So in this slide, I summarize some examples of sources of evidence that brings new knowledge in relation to the quality, safety, and efficacy of the medicinal products. So we have all sorts of sources, from randomized clinical trials to non-interventional studies, such as registry. We also consider the spontaneous adverse reports, and also the literature or expert committee reports and opinions. All of these build knowledge on the quality, safety, and efficacy on the medicinal product. And the EMA will use this data in order to reevaluate at different points the benefit risk of the medicinal product. So we have discussed what is happening during the life cycle of the products. We have discussed what are the data sources. Now in this slide, I summarize what are the main regulatory tools that the agency used to reevaluate the benefit risk of the medicinal products. Why we have so many and with different names? Well, this is marked by the European legislation, but each of them is designed for a purpose. Okay, so in terms of the development and maintenance of the product, we have variations. Variation you can see here as a single point, but I can assure you that the agency spent a lot of resources on variations. It's the most submitted procedure that we handle here in the agency. Then we have, in terms of the periodic evaluation of the benefit risk, we have all sorts, from annual renewals, annual reassessment, yes, I refer to previous presentations, periodic safety of the record, and post-authorization measures. That's what PAMS stands for. And finally, we have an ad hoc evaluation of the benefit risk of the product. In this situation, the most common are referrals, and in very rare situations, urgent safety restriction. For example, I've been 5 years in the agency. I never heard about an urgent safety restriction. I'll explain this later on. In terms of the periodic evaluation of the benefit risk, I will cover some of the regulatory tools. So another procedure that we handle quite frequently are periodic safety update reports. These are basically pharmacovigilance reports that aims to provide a comprehensive and concise critical analysis of the benefit risk balance considered on safety data that is emerging with the use of the medicinal product. Okay, these are submitted periodically. It's usually more frequent at the beginning after the market authorization, and the more we know about the product, the frequency decreases. Yeah, because we are more certain on the benefit risk of the product. Just to mention here as well that the periodicity is reflected in what we call the URD list, which is a database that includes all the substances and when the companies need to submit the next periodic safety update report. So, and this slide about renewals, annual reassessment, this complements previous presentation from my colleague Margot Sata. Just to indicate that the European legislation requires the renewal or reassessment of the license depending on the type of market authorization. If you recall from previous presentation, we have authorization under exceptional circumstances and authorizations and conditional authorization. So basically the difference is based on the uncertainties we have at the time of the market authorization. And we really need to further supervise the benefit risk on a regular basis. How we do this? With post-approval commitments, what we call here a specific obligation. Yeah, for a standard market authorization, there will be a reevaluation of the benefit risk after 5 years. But as also mentioned in previous presentation, there is no specific obligation review. For market authorization under exceptional circumstances, we also have a reevaluation after 5 years, but also we have annual reassessment, which is a reevaluation on supervision of progress of the studies that are imposed at the time of initial market authorization. And conditional is the same concept about with the marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances. The only thing is that we, for conditional market authorization, we have at the beginning the licenses renew on a yearly basis until the benefit risk gap has been filled and it is switched to a standard market authorization. Okay. So in terms of post-authorization post-authorization studies and post-authorization measures, regulators can require studies to be conducted at any time. Yeah, it could be for more serious concern, or it could be to consolidate. So why? Exactly what I said. In order to consolidate or to fill the gaps about the benefit risk, they can be legally binding. We have the sample as previous slide of the specific obligations, but also we have Annex 2 conditions, measures linked to the RMP, to the risk management plan. And this be, for example, to further characterize a safety concern in case there is a need to implement a restriction on how this medicinal product is used. But also we have measures that are aimed to consolidate the benefit risk. Those are recommendations. These are not really legally binding, but we ask the company to commit to perform them when we ask, when we impose this recommendation. One example of this, for example, will be to improve a quality assay in order to ensure that the product is of the intended quality. Also to mention that the market authorization holder usually submit a protocol before they conduct the study. Yeah, this is evaluated by the agency and aims to ensure that the study will meet the objective. In terms of development and maintenance of the product, we have variations. Okay, so variations means basically introduction of changes to the terms of the marketing authorization. It could be on the safety, on the efficacy, on the quality part. And there are different types of variations depending on the risk of this change poses for this on the benefit risk of the product. We have changes not requiring prior approval, such as type 1A's variations, and we have also changes that require requiring prior approval, such as 1B, type 2, and extension. There is a different level of assessment depending on the risk and the extent of this change. For example, it wouldn't be the same to evaluate the extension of a shelf life for a product than the introduction of an indication. Yeah, that's where the difference in the type of variation come from. And here I summarize some examples of variations that the agency received. So we have from new solutions to the patients, such as new indications, new strengths, pharmaceutical forms, or changes in the posology. But also new safety and efficacy data, such as update of the pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics data, which is useful also for the doctors when prescribing this information. Updates in the risk management plan or safety warnings. Finally, we also have variations in order to maintain the supply of medicinal products. These are, for example, changes to the manufacturing sites or extensions of the shelf life of the product, among others. So these slides summarize a fictional example. Please don't link it to any product because it came out of my brain without thinking any product, but gives you an idea of what will be the regulatory activity linked to a medicinal product after authorization. So if you look in the lower part, you will see a periodic evaluation of the benefit risk. You can see here annual renewal, so that means that this product is approved under conditional authorization. So the benefit risk will be reevaluated periodically. In the upper part, you could see also some examples which are linked to the development and maintenance of the product, and this can happen anytime. Usually it's more active at the beginning, but it doesn't really follow a pattern. We will now pass on the ad hoc evaluation of the benefit risk of the product. And this, I will cover referrals. So apart from marketing authorization procedures, another regulatory procedure that have a lot of repercussion aside are referrals. Okay, so referrals are procedures that assess very important concerns on the safety, on the quality, on efficacy, which are impacting the benefit-risk balance of the medicinal product. And they differentiate for variation in the sense that has a component of urgency. Okay? They are mainly initiated either by member state of the European Commission. Market authorization holder can also initiate a referral, but of course they are not interested in doing so because all the repercussions it has. The EMA and its committees will conduct a scientific assessment on behalf of the European Union. And once this scientific assessment is concluded, a single outcome will be valid across the European Union. There are different types of referrals depending on the urgency and the issue. We have referrals due to quality issues, to safety, to efficacy, and particulars. By particulars, I mean to some requirements linked to the market authorization, as it could be that the clinical studies needs to be performed in accordance to the good clinical practices, or the manufacturing of this product needs to be done in accordance to the good manufacturing practices. Okay, so in the lower part, you'll find all the type of referrals that are reflected in the legislation with very legal names, and you can have an idea of the different types, what are the purposes for this. Here in this slide, I summarize some examples of referrals, and you can see here the importance and why it has repercussions. First example is suspension of market authorizations due to concerns on the reliability of clinical studies. Remember what I mentioned about particulars and the good clinical practices. This example was about data manipulation revealed after inspection of the clinical site that there was affecting a number of medicinal products in the European Union. Then another example is a restriction on the use of the medicinal product due to serious and life-threatening liver problems, or the review of information on the safety concern venous thromboembolism for a group of prescription-only and over-the-counter medicines, so the contraceptive, if you recall this case. So what I want to summarize here is that at any time, the agency will trigger a referral, will trigger a evaluation of the benefit risk when there is a need, when there is a serious concern, and it has a component of urgency, and we act on this. Well, here I also list some other post-authorization activities that take place. One example is a sunset clause, where the market authorization will expire after 3 years if it is not put into the market, or urgent safety restriction, which is basically one particular in the European legislation that allows the agency to introduce a restriction within 24 hours. We also have withdrawals. We mentioned, you have the question before about withdrawals. So to sum up, I know you are craving for coffee and sweets. So I would be happy if you take these two messages home. The first one is that the knowledge of the quality, safety, and efficacy is built throughout the life cycle of the product. And the second one is the benefit risk of any medicinal product is evaluated at different stages through different regulatory activities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Any questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Gilly Sparia from Melanoma Patient Europe again. I just wanted to know, quite frequently you have post-marketing changes due to dosing, flat doses, scheduling of dosing, which is extremely annoying for patients that it wasn't found out before. And the excuse is always given that, oh yes, we knew the dosing schedules from the early preclinical phase 1 dose escalation studies that this new change was feasible. How much can the EMA actually say when they're looking at the dossier in the first place to say it's quite clear that the dosing schedule, the decisions they're making on the dosing schedule are commercial or competitive, and you can push them before they have their marketing authorization to change the dosing schedules or flat rates or whatever?
Well, in terms of the dosing, yes, this is indeed very important issue at the time of authorization. If the committee considering that there are some issues in relation to the dosing and information in the posology that are mainly for two different reasons. One is perhaps because it can lead to medication errors, and in that case, the company will need to take the necessary risk minimization measures. The other issue is because it's linked to the development, and the committee believes that could have an impact in that situation. Fortunately, we have the post-authorization measures in which we can request the company to conduct any type of studies in order to update the information in 4.2 of the posology.
Well, I do think we try to ask the company questions concerning dosing during the assessment procedure before we approve. What limits us is, of course, that we have to take into account with what kind of dosing the pivotal studies were performed. So we cannot go to other doses than actually has been studied. But we do question it for instance, for subgroups and whether it could be better to have a flat dose and so on. So we do what we can, but of course we are to some extent limited. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Mimi from Ghana. If a product is given a scientific opinion, what are the post-approval commitments? Are they the same? Do you require renewals, annual assessments? Would you be following the product in the same way for safety? Is the company expected to do the same thing as a normal registration, or do you leave that to the country entirely throughout the life cycle? Would you be expected to do the same sort of follow-up for safety? Or would you leave it to the country that is going to register or use the product entirely? Mm-hmm. Or are there commitments that you would follow up right through to the end of the...
No, actually, that's a good question. Thank you. It's the agency who followed up. So at the time of market authorization, and it also can happen any time during the life cycle, we can impose post-authorization commitment that you name it. It's, for example, for a safety issue, we want to further investigate the safety issue, we can request a post-authorization safety study. So this will be imposed at the time when this is detected. There are different levels of legal enforceability. That's what I explained before in terms of the different types. If you remember, specific obligation on S2 or condition linked to the risk management plan, and this links to the seriousness of this concern that we have. But the agency will, for example, agree on the protocol to ensure that the study meets the intended purpose, and then we will follow up with the company whether they are actually fulfilling. Then we have a data system in which we monitor what are the due dates for products, for post-authorization commitments, and if they are not fulfilling, we will contact the company to see what's going on.
So there is a standard level of requirement, like annual, 5-year renewal of the marketing authorization happens for every marketing authorization. But the level of additional data depends on whether it is a standard, lower level, conditional, where you expect to provide every year more information in order to get to the normal marketing authorization. And the third one is exceptional circumstances, where you still have obligation, but we know you will never complete totally the normal package, I would say.
I think to your question, for centralized products, the responsibility lies with EMA to ensure that the company submit the information, then the rapporteurs will assess it. Yep. Do you have a follow-up question? Was it clear to you? Perhaps we could follow up during the coffee break? Yeah? There's a question on the left.
My question is somewhat similar. So it's regards the quality of the. I mean, you in the post-market authorization you require a lot of data. So my question is, you expect this data coming from the company, or you promote active prospective studies, or do you just review the literature? This was my first question. The way to if it's a passive recollection of information coming from the vigilance, or promotion of active research. And the next very short question is, how often it happens that a drug that has been approved on exceptional circumstances or conditional, then is withdrawn? It has happened?
I'm going to take the first question first. So in terms of active research or revaluation of the literature, it will depend on the issue. We normally, if we have a concern which is linked to a safety issue, we will request a post-authorization safety studies, which has additional pharmacovigilance activity. But we can also ask the company to further take into account all the emerging evidence on the knowledge of the product, and we actually not only as a post-authorization commitment, but we will systematically do this as part of the renewal. Okay, so the renewal involves a evaluation of the benefit risk, and as part of that, we ask the company to provide any scientific literature which is relevant to the benefit risk of the product. Yeah.
So, in short, we have 3 levels. The first one is we monitor spontaneous reporting, where we can see signals of new safety information. We have a requirement for company to provide on a regular basis what we call the PSUR, Periodic Safety Update Report. So they need to report to us and compile all this information, which is a complementary to what we can see in our database. And the third one is proactive research, which is an imposed obligation on the company to do certain studies and trials in order to complement in a prospective way the information on both efficacy and safety. So not the last one is not always imposed. It depends on the status of the marketing authorization, but it is a possibility, and we're using it more and more. It comes from the 2012 pharmacovigilance new regulation, so we have more power in this area.
And then for your second question on how frequent products are withdrawn, well, I cannot give you numbers, but it happens. Normally for commercial reasons, because if there are linked to safety issues, the agency will need to explain. So we will need to issue a written statement. What are the reasons, safety reasons linked to the use of the medicinal product? Okay, they are not only linked to products under exceptional circumstances or conditional, but it could happen to any type of product.
So yes, just to complement what Carlos said, when I was preparing the presentation on the exceptional versus conditional versus full, and if you go on our website and you kind of click to see the information all the exceptional, on the conditional, you can see also the information on the marketing status, and from there you can infer how many out of those. I mean, it's a handful, and most of the cases I think is for commercial reasons, but it's yes, it's explicitly there on our website. Yes.
Yes. Okay, let's thank the speakers, and you can continue the discussions over the coffee break.